One of Blender's presets is 2D animation. This sets you up to start working with Grease Pencil right away. We're still in Blender, but the world setting has been modified to this almost white color as if we're looking at a blank piece of paper. We're looking directly through a camera, and a blank Grease Pencil has been generated with 2 layers and 4 materials ready to use. We're also in draw mode from the get-go, and the default brush is a pencil. For purposes such as demonstrating how Grease Pencil works, as well as other practicalities you might need as you become more familiar with the interface, tweaking some of these settings is almost always going to be necessary. Note that if any time you want to go back to the factory settings, there is the nuclear option, and you can start again from this point. I'll begin with the default 2D animation preset. I'll open up my preferences here. Going up to interface, I'm going to change the resolution scale to something which will screen capture more clearly, perhaps 1.35. As a personal preference, under the key map, I like to switch out my middle mouse action from orbit to pan. I've enabled the screencast keys add-on. At any time in any lesson, you could pause to see what I pressed, or see what shortcut key was used, to get a clearer idea of what was done. Once these changes have been made, I can go to File, Defaults, Save Startup File. I'm going to reopen Blender and select the 2D animation preset to check if the changes have taken. In the following lessons, I will be using the 2D preset as I've modified it here. Now you can go ahead and make your own alterations should you feel confident, or you can download a preset file I've supplied with this lesson and save it as your 2D animation startup file. Another option is to create your own custom layout. Let's say we want a preset with some custom brushes, materials, a layout, and we don't want to append all those things in every time we open Blender. We can modify it to our heart's content, then save out a file in a folder which you should name as the preset that you want to save. I'm going to name mine 2D illustration. Then I'm going to save this file as startup.blend, all lowercase. I'll now navigate to those folders, find the 2D illustration folder, and create a zip file. Back in Blender, click on the logo and choose Install Application Template. We navigate to where we saved our zip file, select it, and click on Install Template from File. And it will now be added to our list of presets. Now when we start Blender, we can select this from the menu, and it will save us a lot of time. Like a mesh or curve object, a Grease Pencil object has various components that make it up. We'll take a look at a ready-made Grease Pencil object that is available for us to add. I'll select the Suzanne object, then select the Object Properties tab. The object type is indicated by this squiggle icon. Here, we can view and adjust layers much like we would in a 2D Paint application. Each layer can contain strokes, fills, a combination of both, and you can have multiple layers in a single Grease Pencil object. You can add, subtract, perform a list of functions such as duplicating and merging, and you can rearrange, isolate, or lock layers. You can change the blend mode for each layer, as well as its opacity. The Use Light setting controls whether or not a layer will interact with in-scene lighting. There'll be more on this later. Masks can be any other layer assigned to hide or reveal parts of your layer. You can assign multiple masks and even invert what is masked. Transform controls the location, rotation, and scale of each layer. This can include the Z direction. You have controls for adjusting the tint color, how much that color overrides the layer, and even adjust the thickness of the strokes on each layer. You can parent a selected layer to a specific object, and if that object is an armature, you can assign a layer to a specific bone. You can assign a layer a pass index or even a view layer for compositing. Under Display, you can assign a custom channel color which will appear in the dope sheet when animating. This is fantastic for viewing related layers at a glance, especially if you have many layers to keep track of. The next areas are for the grease pencil object as a whole, not just individual layers. Onion skidding settings are handy for drawing frame-by-frame animations. You can switch between what frames are seen, set the opacity of frames that are onion skinned before and after. You can filter by the keyframe type you want to see onion skinned, and also set the number of keyframes that are seen before and after your active frame when onion skinning mode is on. Just like with mesh objects, you can assign vertex groups for the purposes of weight painting. Under strokes, you have two types of stroke depth order. 2D will respect the layering system, in which the topmost layer appears in front of others, and 3D, which will rely on the position relative to the camera in 3D space that a particular shape occupies. The stroke thickness can be set to world space. This is set by default, and it means that the thickness of a stroke is consistent in relation to 3D space, whereas screen space means that the stroke thickness will remain consistent in relation to the 2D plane of your screen. The thickness scale can be set lower or higher than its default, and the curve resolution controls how smooth a stroke will appear when editing in curve mode. Of course, this is just a quick overview. We'll be looking at a lot of what was just covered in more detail throughout the lessons to come. Grease pencil objects have their own set of materials, which are not shared by other objects in Blender. As of right now, grease pencil materials don't support nodes yet. You can still see material nodes for a grease pencil object, but they will be ignored. This is just an inconsistency in the UI and will be rectified when grease pencil materials are integrated with the rest of Blender in future releases. A grease pencil material can be defined by two main parameters, a stroke and a fill. Strokes can be varied by line type, style, and base color. The stroke type can be set to line, in which all points along a stroke are connected by segments, much like a curve. Dots or squares are a round or square stamp appearing at each point along a stroke. The stroke style can be a solid or an imported texture. Holdout is a way of using the material itself as a mask. Fills are the shapes defined by the outline. A fill style can be solid, a gradient, or a texture. You can set a base color and its alpha, and you can also set a fill to holdout. A grease pencil material can incorporate a stroke, a fill, or both. Color attributes can be applied to any material and are made available in both draw and vertex paint modes. While materials can be assigned a base color, using color attributes allows you to work more like a 2D paint application. If a material has a texture and an alpha, the color attribute will affect the opaque sections of the material. And if the blend is set to 0, the material base color overrides any color attributes. But if the blend is set to 1, the color attribute takes over. This is really great for textures such as halftone, hatching, or if you want to create a graphite or paint custom brush. Several strokes or fills can share the same material, but have different color attributes. You can change a color attribute by using the tint brush. There's already a default palette, but adding your own can be done simply in a number of ways. The first way is to create a new color palette. We'll give this a name, and we'll select colors from the color wheel, adding each color to our palette. You can sort your color palette based on hue, saturation, value, or luminance. This comes in really handy when you want to choose colors that are high contrast or low contrast at a glance. You can also create a palette from an image. Open an image editor window and import an image. Under the image menu, select Extract Palette. Now you'll have a palette with the name of the image and colors selected from that image. A third way to create a palette is to just use the Color Select tool or the eyedropper tool, and you can select any color from anywhere on the screen. As you create assets throughout this course, you'll become much more familiar with materials and color attributes, and I encourage you to create your own sets of materials and palettes to work with, both for the lessons provided and for your own projects in future. Just like other objects in Blender, you can switch between different modes to transform, edit, sculpt, and even weight paint on a grease pencil object. Because mode menus are contextual, grease pencil objects also have a draw and vertex paint mode. You can toggle between the two most recently used modes with the Tab key, and access a radial mode menu with Control Tab. Selecting Suzanne, I'll toggle into Edit mode. By default, selection is set to all stroke points, but we can switch over to select only points. This third selection mode, which selects points between other strokes, only becomes obvious when other strokes are breaking up a line. I'll toggle into draw mode now, sketch 2 lines to break the stroke here, and then toggle back into edit mode using Tab, and then use this selection mode to only select the points between these two drawn strokes. There is an additional feature which can treat the strokes in edit mode like a curve. If you recall, you can set the curve resolution in your grease pencil object properties under the strokes segment. But up in the tool settings, you can also edit the resolution, threshold, angle, and whether the resolution is adaptive or constant. Just like with curves, you can use shortcuts like the V key to change the handle type. Note, however, that toggling this mode off after altering handle types or curve resolutions will redraw the number of points along the edited stroke. Using either the Toolbox, right-click contextual menu, or some shortcuts will allow you to extrude points, scale a point or stroke's thickness, bend and shear selections of points, and by enabling proportional fall-off, you can smooth out the effects of some of these operations. You can isolate the fall-off to only points that are connected, change the type of fall-off, and even adjust the radius of influence on the fly by middle mouse scrolling. It's been hinted at, but in case it isn't obvious, grease pencil objects exist in 3D space. While you can certainly treat grease pencil illustrations as purely 2D assets, that strokes, shapes, and overall objects can be drawn, edited, manipulated, or otherwise affected within a 3D environment should expand what is possible to create with the grease pencil. Let's explore the toolbox and make some cool, reusable assets while we're at it. We'll begin with the 2D animation preset. We already have a blank grease pencil object named Stroke in this file. It has 4 materials and 2 layers. The toolbox is this row of icons over here on the left. By default, we are already set to draw mode. You can toggle the visibility of the toolbox using the T key. I'm going to left click and drag so that we can better see the tools with their names as well as the icon. We're going to create a cloud shape just using the tools at hand. No stylus is necessary for this. These simple shapes can be created with just your mouse and keyboard. Now the default brush is set to pencil, and the material is a solid stroke. Primitive shapes such as line, box, and circle will adopt whatever brush and material is selected. Select the circle. Click and drag an oval shape. If you hold down Shift, you can lock the proportions and create a perfect circle. Hit Enter or Return to commit, and then tab into Edit mode. Switch to Point Select, and select all the points on the circle. Then hit Shift-D to duplicate. We'll move this circle and scale it down. We'll duplicate this circle a few more times, moving each duplicate around until we get roughly a shape that resembles some sort of a cumulonimbus cloud, one of those big puffy clouds. Now the default settings will also scale down the thickness of the line. If this is something that you are concerned about, while in edit mode, go to your stroke menu and then down here where it says scale thickness, untick this box. Now whenever we scale something, the thickness of the line will remain consistent. Let's go back into draw mode and we'll select the curved line. We'll click and drag across so that we can draw out this curve. A curved line has 2 points at each end and 2 handles. We can use these handles to further manipulate that curve so that we can get this nice kind of smooth dip here. And then once we're happy, we can hit Enter or Return, and this commits the transformation of the curved line. Now obviously we've got all of these intersecting lines inside the shape of the cloud that we want to get rid of. And there's a couple of ways to do this. When we're in draw mode, we can use the cutter tool. That's the little thing that looks like the scissors. And by lasso selecting over any intersecting segment, this will automatically erase those lines. It's not perfect, and so you may have to go over a line a couple of times. The other option is to toggle into edit mode and switch your select mode to between other strokes. That's the third button along in the selection mode. Now each segment that you click on will only select points of segments which are intersected by other strokes. Either way, we can clean up all of the interior strokes so we're left with just an outline. There might be some artifacting, and all of these segments are actually detached. We can select all, then hit Ctrl J. All the segments should attach. Now all we have to do is hit the F key to close off the shape. If we select all the points and go into our material settings, select our solid fill material and assign, this should fill out the shape by replacing the solid stroke with the fill. And if all things have been done correctly or well, we should have a consistent cloud shape. Once you're happy with this, go ahead and make a few more clouds. You can do this by repeating the process we just did, or by entering edit mode and sculpting, or in proportional fall-off, moving around those points using some of the edit methods that we have learned so far. Once you're happy with this and we've got a few cloud shapes on different grease pencil objects, go ahead and save the file. I'm going to call mine clouds.blend.